The distant wail of a train whistle cut through the Montana territory's still afternoon air as Gabriella Hayes tucked a stray lock of chestnut hair behind her ear and stared at the horizon, wondering if today would finally be different. It was 1876, and like the untamed landscape surrounding her small homestead, Gabriella's heart remained wild, guarded, and stubbornly independent. "Miss Hayes, I don't mean to disturb you, but those fence posts won't set themselves," called Edwin, the elderly hired hand who'd helped maintain what little remained of her father's dream since his passing last winter. Gabriella turned from the endless expanse of prairie grass swaying in the breeze. "I know, Edwin, I was just—" She paused, unsure how to explain the restlessness that had been plaguing her lately. At 23, she should have been married with children by now, according to society's expectations. Instead, she was struggling to maintain a failing ranch with dwindling funds and even less hope. "Just daydreaming again, no harm in that," Edwin said with a kind smile. "But I'd best be heading home before dark. My joints can't take another night ride." Gabriella nodded, guilt washing over her. Edwin was far too old to be working this hard, but she couldn't afford to hire anyone younger or stronger. "Of course, I'll see you tomorrow." As Edwin's silhouette disappeared down the dirt road, Gabriella's eyes drifted to the weathered letter clutched in her hand, the final notice from the bank. 3 months behind on payments, they were threatening to take everything in just 30 days unless she could produce the considerable sum she owed. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "This land is our legacy, Gabby. Never let anyone take it from you." But what choice did she have? A woman alone had few options in this unforgiving territory. The distant sound of hoofbeats drew her attention. Riders were approaching unusual for this remote stretch. Gabriella reached for the rifle that was never far from her side these days and waited. 3 men on horseback emerged from the tree line, their figures silhouetted against the setting sun. The leader, a tall man with broad shoulders, raised his hand in greeting as they approached. "Evening, madam," he called, his voice carrying easily across the yard. "Might we trouble you for some water? Been riding since dawn." Gabriella kept her rifle visible but lowered. "The well's over there," she replied, gesturing with her free hand. "Help yourselves, then be on your way." The 3 men dismounted, and Gabriella studied them cautiously. 2 were rough-looking fellows with weather-beaten faces and hard eyes. But the third, the one who had spoken, carried himself differently. His dark hair curled beneath his hat, and despite several days' worth of stubble, there was something refined about his features. "Much obliged," he said, tipping his hat. "Name's Colton Reed. These are my traveling companions, Burke and Simmons." "Gabriella Hayes," she replied curtly, offering nothing more. Colton drank deeply from the ladle, then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Fine water you have here, Miss Hayes. Almost as refreshing as the sight of your beautiful ranch." Gabriella nearly laughed at the obvious flattery. Beautiful was hardly the word for her struggling homestead with its leaning fence posts and weathered barn. "Mr. Reed, I appreciate your politeness, but if you're finished, daylight's wasting." "Of course," he smiled, revealing straight white teeth. "Though I couldn't help but notice your corral could use some mending and that barn roof's seen better days." "Are you in the habit of pointing out strangers' misfortunes, Mr. Reed?" "Not at all. I'm in the habit of offering solutions," he gestured to his companions. "We're handy with tools and looking for honest work. Room and board is all we ask in return." Gabriella's eyes narrowed. 3 grown men willing to work for nothing but meals and a place to sleep. "Forgive me if I find that suspicious." Colton shrugged. "We're heading to Virginia City. Heard there's good money to be made in the mines there, but we're in no particular hurry, and it seems to me you could use the help." "What I need and don't need isn't your concern," Gabriella replied, though she couldn't deny the temptation of the offer. With 3 strong men, she might actually stand a chance of making the ranch profitable again before the bank's deadline. "Fair enough," Colton said, replacing his hat. "We'll be on our way then. Thank you for the water." As they turned to mount their horses, Gabriella found herself calling out, "Wait!" The word escaped before she could stop it. Colton looked back, one eyebrow raised in question. "One night," she said firmly. "You can sleep in the barn." We'll discuss terms in the morning. A slow smile spread across his face. Yes, madam, you won't regret it. But as she watched them lead their horses toward the barn, Gabriella already wondered if she would. That evening, Gabriella served a simple meal of beans and cornbread on the porch, unwilling to invite three strange men into her home. Burke and Simmons wolfed down their food with little conversation, but Colton ate slowly, his eyes taking in the property with what appeared to be genuine interest. "Your father built this place?" he asked between bites. Gabriella stiffened. "How do you know it wasn't me?" The craftsmanship speaks of experience. "These beams are at least 15 years old, judging by the weathering. You couldn't have been more than a child then." She was surprised by his observation. "My father came out here in '59 before the war, built everything himself. He passed last winter." "I'm sorry for your loss," Colton said, and the sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. "Thank you." She changed the subject quickly. "How is it that three men like yourselves are traveling together to the mines? You don't strike me as longtime friends." Burke and Simmons exchanged glances, but Colton answered smoothly. "We met on the trail, safety in numbers out here. And before that," Colton set down his empty plate. "I was a lawman back in Kansas. Decided I'd had enough of chasing trouble and wanted to make an honest fortune instead." "A lawman?" Gabriella couldn't hide her skepticism. He reached into his coat and produced a tarnished badge. "Sheriff of Dodge City for 3 years. Left when the politics got too complicated." "And your friends?" Burke was a blacksmith. Simmons worked the railroads, both looking for something better. The men nodded in confirmation, though neither elaborated. "I see," Gabriella said, still uncertain whether to believe them. "Well, gentlemen, the barn is yours for the night. There's fresh straw in the loft. I'll expect you at sunrise if you're serious about that work." "We'll be there," Colton assured her. True to his word, when Gabriella emerged from the house at dawn, all three men were already awake. Burke had kindled a fire and was brewing coffee, while Simmons was examining the corral fence with a critical eye. Colton was nowhere to be seen. "Morning, Miss Hayes," Burke called. "Hope you don't mind us starting the coffee." "Not at all," she replied, surprised by their initiative. "Where's Mr. Reed?" As if in answer, the barn door swung open and Colton emerged leading her old plow horse, now properly brushed and looking more spirited than it had in months. "Morning, Miss Hayes. Thought I'd get acquainted with your stock. This old fellow just needed some attention." Gabriella watched in amazement as the horse nuzzled Colton's shoulder affectionately. "Samson hasn't let anyone handle him since father died. Animals can sense when someone respects them," Colton said, patting the horse's neck. "Now, about those terms, I propose we stay for 2 weeks. In that time, we'll repair your barn, mend your fences, and help with whatever planting or harvesting needs doing. In return, you provide meals and a place to sleep." Gabriella crossed her arms. "And what do you get out of this arrangement, Mr. Reed?" 2 weeks is a long delay if you're eager for mining work." Colton's blue eyes met hers directly. "Perhaps I appreciate the quiet of country living before subjecting myself to a mining camp, or perhaps I just believe in helping those in need." "I never said I was in need," Gabriella replied sharply. "You didn't have to. This place has good bones, but it's crying out for attention that one person can't possibly provide alone." His assessment stung because it was true. 2 weeks, she agreed finally. "But I reserve the right to ask you to leave at any time if I'm not satisfied with your work or your conduct." "Fair enough." Colton extended his hand. "Do we have a deal?" Gabriella hesitated only a moment before shaking it. His hand was warm and calloused, the hand of a man accustomed to hard work, not the soft grip of a swindler. "Deal." By midday, Gabriella had to admit she was impressed. Burke had already repaired a section of fence that had been broken for months. Simmons was clearing irrigation ditches with remarkable efficiency, and Colton was up on the barn roof, replacing missing shingles with skilled precision. Edwin arrived looking bewildered at the flurry of activity. "Miss Hayes, what's all this?" "Temporary help," Gabriella explained, watching Colton work. "They're passing through and offered their services." Edwin eyed the men suspiciously. "You sure that's wise? 3 strange men on your property." They showed me a sheriff's badge. The leader was a lawman in Kansas. Still, Edwin lowered his voice, a woman alone, people will talk. Let them, Gabriella replied, though she knew he was right. Her reputation was already precarious simply because she lived alone. Having 3 male boarders would certainly set tongues wagging in the nearest town. Well, I suppose with all this help you won't be needing me for a while, Edwin said, clearly hurt. Gabriella touched his arm. Nonsense, I need your expertise more than ever. Who else knows this land like you do? Besides, I trust your judgment. Keep an eye on them for me. The compliment seemed to mollify the old man. Very well, I'll stay and supervise these youngsters. By the end of the first day, more work had been completed than Gabriella had managed in the past month. As they sat down to a hearty dinner, venison stew that Burke had prepared after Simmons successfully hunted a deer, she found herself relaxing slightly in their company. This is delicious, she admitted, savoring the rich broth. Burke was a camp cook during the war before he took up blacksmithing, Colton explained. One of the few benefits of traveling with him, Burke grunted what might have been acknowledgement. Tomorrow we should check your well mechanism, noticed it's pulling hard. And that southeast corner of your property needs better drainage, Simmons added. Soil's too wet for proper crops there. Gabriella glanced between them, surprised by their observations. You've learned a lot about my ranch in just one day. Good land speaks to those willing to listen, Colton said. Your father chose well. This could be one of the most productive homesteads in the territory with the right management. It was once, Gabriella admitted. Before he got sick, I've been trying, but... It's a lot for anyone, Colton finished for her. Let alone someone working alone. Their eyes met across the table, and for a brief moment, Gabriella felt understood in a way she hadn't since her father's death. She quickly looked away. Well, we have 2 weeks to make improvements. Best make them count. Later that night, as Gabriella prepared for bed, she found herself standing at her window, watching the light of a lantern glowing in the barn where the men had made their quarters. Despite her lingering suspicions, she felt safer than she had in months. The next week passed in a blur of activity. True to their word, the men worked from sunrise to sunset, tackling projects that Gabriella had long ago given up hope of completing. The barn roof was fully repaired, the fences secure, and they'd even managed to plow and plant a field that had lain fallow the previous season. Colton proved particularly adept at handling the livestock. Under his care, Gabriella's small herd of cattle seemed to thrive, and even her temperamental milk cow became more cooperative. How did you learn so much about ranching? She asked one evening as they walked the property line together, assessing the day's progress. I thought you were a lawman. Before that, I grew up on a ranch in Texas, he explained. My father raised cattle and horses. I worked alongside him until I was 18, then the war came. You fought, he nodded, his expression darkening slightly. Confederate cavalry. Not something I'm particularly proud of now, but at the time, it seemed the right thing to do. And afterward, drifted for a while. Took the sheriff's job because the town needed someone who could handle a gun and wasn't afraid to stand up to the cowboys coming up the trail. Gabriella studied his profile in the fading light. Why did you really leave? Colton was quiet for a long moment. I shot a man, a boy really, couldn't have been more than 17. He drew on me during a saloon brawl, drunk and stupid. I had no choice, but... He shook his head. Some things stay with you, the honesty in his voice touched her. I'm sorry, don't be, we all have our burdens to bear, he glanced at her. Including you, Miss Hayes, that bank notice you keep looking at, is it as bad as it seems? Gabriella stiffened. You've been going through my things. No, but I've seen you reading it every night, and each time you look more worried than before. She hesitated, then sighed. Yes, it's bad. The bank is foreclosing in 3 weeks unless I can pay what's owed. It's an impossible sum. How much? $200. Colton whistled softly. That is a considerable amount, but not impossible. For me, it might as well be. Women aren't exactly welcome in most paying professions, Mr. Reed. Call me Colton, please. He was quiet for a moment, thinking. Your cattle look healthy enough. How many head do you have? 15. But they're not ready for market yet. What about your horse, Samson? He's a fine animal, could fetch a good price. Gabriella shook her head firmly. Samson was my father's pride, I couldn't sell him. Then we'll find another way, Colton said with such confidence that Gabriella almost believed him. She questioned. You'll be gone in a week, Mr. Reed Colton. This isn't your problem to solve. He stopped walking and turned to face her directly. Maybe I don't want to be gone in a week. Gabriella's heart skipped a beat at his words and the intensity of his gaze. What are you saying? Before he could answer, a shout from the direction of the house interrupted them. Simmons was running toward them, waving urgently. Riders coming, he called. 6 of them armed. Colton's demeanor changed instantly. He reached for the pistol at his hip. Get back to the house, Gabriella, now. The authority in his voice compelled her to obey, though questions raced through her mind. Who were these riders, and why did Colton suddenly look so grim? As they hurried back, Burke emerged from the barn with a rifle, positioning himself on the porch. Colton directed Gabriella inside but remained on the steps, his hand resting on his holstered gun. The riders approached slowly, deliberately. In the lead was a man Gabriella recognized with a sinking heart, Marshal Williams from town, accompanied by his deputies and several men she didn't know. Evening, Marshal, Colton called, his voice casual despite the tension evident in his stance. What brings you out this way? The marshal dismounted, his hand also hovering near his weapon. Looking for you, Reed, or should I say Carson, Colton Carson, wanted in 3 territories for bank robbery and murder. Gabriella felt the blood drain from her face. She stepped forward. There must be some mistake, Mr. Reed was a sheriff in Dodge City. Is that what he told you? The marshal spat on the ground. Madam, this man and his gang have been robbing their way across the West for 2 years. We got a telegram from Wyoming yesterday with their descriptions. Recognized them when they rode through town last week. Gabriella turned to Colton, searching his face for denial. What she saw instead was resignation. Is it true? She whispered. Colton's eyes met hers, filled with regret. Not all of it. I was a lawman once, the rest. He sighed. It's complicated. Hands up, all of you, the marshal ordered. Miss Hayes, step away. These men are dangerous criminals. No, the word burst from Gabriella with surprising force. I don't believe you. They've been here for days, working honestly. If they were thieves, they could have robbed me and been gone. The marshal's expression softened slightly. Madam, I understand you might have developed feelings for these men, but they're not who they claim to be. One of the deputies stepped forward, a wanted poster in his hand. The crude drawing did bear a resemblance to Colton, though the name printed beneath was indeed Carson, not Reed. Colton? Gabriella's voice trembled, his shoulders sagged. My real name is Carson. I was a sheriff, that part's true, but after that boy, I couldn't wear the badge anymore. I fell in with Burke and Simmons. We've taken money from banks, yes, but never hurt anyone who didn't draw on us first. Murdered 2 guards in Cheyenne, the marshal countered. They fired first, Burke growled. Was self-defense. Tell it to the judge, the marshal replied coldly. You're all under arrest. Colton's hand moved slightly toward his gun, and Gabriella saw the marshal tense in response. In that moment, she realized blood was about to be spilled on her land. Stop, she cried, stepping between them. No one is dying here today. Madam, move aside, the marshal ordered. Marshal Williams, these men have been working for me for a week. They've caused no trouble. I'll vouch for their conduct during that time. That doesn't erase their crimes. No, but perhaps it should count for something. She took a deep breath. If they surrender peacefully, will you guarantee they'll receive a fair trial? The marshal hesitated, then nodded. If they come without resistance, I give you my word they'll see a judge before any sentence is passed. Gabriella turned to Colton. Please, she said softly. Don't make this worse. For a long moment he stared at her, conflict evident in his eyes. Then slowly he raised his hands. I surrender, Marshal. Just leave Miss Hayes out of this. She didn't know who we were. Burke and Simmons followed his lead, though Burke muttered curses under his breath. As the marshal's men bound their wrists, Gabriella felt tears threatening. How could she have been so foolish? How could she have let these men, these criminals, into her life, her home? Colton caught her eye as they led him to a horse. I'm sorry, Gabriella, for lying to you. But not for anything else. What I said about helping you, I meant that. Before she could respond, they were mounted and riding away, leaving Gabriella alone once more with a half-repaired ranch and a heart that inexplicably ached for a man she barely knew, a man who had lied about his very identity. That night, Gabriella barely slept. She paced her small house, alternating between anger at Colton's deception and confusion over her own feelings. She had known him for only a week, yet his absence left a palpable void. The next morning, Edwin arrived early, his face grave. "Heard about what happened? Whole town's talking." "I'm sure they are," Gabriella replied bitterly. "Foolish Gabriella Hayes taken in by outlaws." "Nobody's saying that," Edwin assured her, though his expression suggested otherwise. "Marshal Williams spoke highly of how you handled yourself." "Did he mention that, without those dangerous criminals, I'll lose this place in less than 3 weeks?" She gestured to the unfinished work around the property. "They were my only hope of getting enough done to make this ranch profitable again." Edwin placed a weathered hand on her shoulder. "We'll figure something out, Miss Hayes. Maybe the bank will extend your time if they see you're making improvements." But Gabriella knew better. The bank had been clear: pay in full or lose everything. For the next few days, she threw herself into work, trying desperately to complete what Colton and his men had started. But progress was slow with just her and Edwin, and her thoughts kept returning to Colton, to the genuine concern in his eyes when he spoke of helping her, to the gentle way he handled Samson, to the warmth of his rare smile. A week after the arrest, Gabriella made a decision. She hitched her wagon before dawn and drove the 10 miles to town, determined to see Colton before his trial. The sheriff's office was a small building on the main street with 2 cells in the back. Marshal Williams looked up in surprise when she entered. "Miss Hayes." "Didn't expect to see you here." "I'd like to speak with the prisoners, Marshal," he frowned. "Not sure that's appropriate, madam. They worked for me. I have questions about some of the repairs they started." It was a flimsy excuse, but after a moment's hesitation, the marshal nodded. "5 minutes, and I'll be right here." He led her to the cells, where Burke and Simmons occupied one, while Colton was alone in the other. All 3 men stood when they saw her. "Miss Hayes," Colton said, his voice tinged with disbelief, "what are you doing here?" "I'll give you a moment," the marshal said, stepping just out of earshot but keeping them in view. Gabriella approached Colton's cell, keeping her voice low. "Why did you really come to my ranch? Was it just a place to hide?" Colton gripped the bars between them. "At first, yes. We needed somewhere remote to lie low, but Gabriella, everything else was real. What I said about helping you, I meant it then, and I mean it now." "How can I believe anything you say? Your name isn't even Reed." "No, but the man you got to know, that was the real me. More real than I've been in years." His eyes searched hers. "I know I've lost your trust, but if there was any way I could still help you save your ranch, I would." Gabriella studied his face, looking for any sign of deception. What she saw instead was regret and something else, something that made her heart beat faster. "The trial's tomorrow," she said finally. "The judge is riding in from Helena. I know, we'll most likely hang or at least face a long prison sentence." He attempted a smile. "Not exactly how I plan to end up." "What will happen to your horses?" she asked suddenly. Colton looked confused. "I suppose they'll be sold at auction, along with our other possessions." "Why?" "Just curious." She stepped back as the marshal approached, indicating her time was up. "Goodbye, Mr. Carson." "Gabriella," Colton called as she turned to leave. "For what it's worth, meeting you was the best thing that's happened to me in years. I just wish it had been under different circumstances." She paused but didn't look back. "So do I." The next day, Gabriella returned to town, this time dressed in her finest, which wasn't saying much, given her circumstances. The entire settlement had turned out for the trial, eager to catch a glimpse of the notorious outlaws. The proceedings were held in the town hall with Judge Thompson, a stern-faced man with bushy eyebrows, presiding. Gabriella sat quietly in the back as the charges were read: bank robbery, theft, and the deaths of 2 bank guards in Wyoming. Colton and his men pleaded not guilty to murder but admitted to the robberies. When asked if anyone wished to speak on their behalf, Gabriella found herself standing before she could reconsider. The judge peered at her over his spectacles. "And you are, Gabriella Hayes, Your Honor. These men worked on my ranch for the past week." And did you know they were wanted criminals when you hired them? No, sir. I believed Mr. Carson when he said he was a former lawman looking for honest work. The judge's expression remained impassive. And now that you know the truth, you still wish to speak for them? Gabriella took a deep breath. I do. While they were with me, they worked tirelessly to help repair my failing ranch. They could have robbed me or worse, but instead they showed kindness and integrity. She glanced at Colton, who was watching her with an unreadable expression. I believe there is good in them, Your Honor, especially in Mr. Carson. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Judge Thompson banged his gavel for silence. Your sentiments are noted, Miss Hayes, but these men have admitted to serious crimes. The law must be upheld. I understand, Your Honor, but I would ask the court to consider leniency, particularly regarding Mr. Carson. He surrendered peacefully and prevented what could have been a violent confrontation. The judge considered her words, then turned to the marshal. Is this true? Marshal Williams nodded reluctantly. It is, Your Honor. Carson convinced his men to surrender without a fight. After a brief recess, during which Gabriella waited anxiously, the judge returned with his verdict. Burke and Simmons were sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison for their roles in the robberies, but when it came to Colton, the judge paused. Mr. Carson, the evidence suggests you were the leader of this gang, which would typically warrant the harshest sentence. However, I've also heard testimony about your past as a lawman and your recent conduct. He glanced at Gabriella. Therefore, I sentence you to 10 years in territorial prison with the possibility of parole after 5 years for good behavior. Relief washed over Gabriella. It wasn't freedom, but it wasn't the gallows either. As the prisoners were led away, Colton's eyes found hers across the room. The look they exchanged held 1,000 unspoken words. Outside the courthouse, Gabriella approached Marshal Williams. I'd like to make an offer on the prisoners' horses and equipment when they go to auction. The marshal raised an eyebrow. You need more horses, Miss Hayes. I need good stock if I'm going to rebuild my ranch, she replied evenly. And from what I saw, those are fine animals. 2 days later, Gabriella was the highest and often only bidder on Colton's horses, saddles, and various tools and weapons. The proceeds, she was told, would go toward restitution for the banks that had been robbed. With her new acquisitions, Gabriella returned to her ranch with renewed determination. The horses would allow her to expand her small herd, and the additional tools made repairs easier. But the bank's deadline still loomed, now just over a week away. She was repairing fence posts when Edwin rode up, excitement visible on his weathered face. Miss Hayes, you won't believe what I just heard in town. What is it, Edwin? The Wyoming authorities sent a telegram. Turns out those bank guards Carson and his men supposedly killed aren't dead after all. They were injured in the robbery but recovered. The murder charges have been dropped. Gabriella's heart leaped. What does that mean for their sentences? Judge Thompson is reviewing the case. Word is he might reduce their time considerably. For the first time in weeks, Gabriella felt a flicker of hope not just for Colton, but perhaps for herself as well. The next day, she made another trip to town, this time to speak with the banker, Mr. Holloway. The balding man greeted her with poorly concealed impatience. Miss Hayes, unless you've come with the full amount you owe, I'm afraid there's nothing to discuss. I haven't, she admitted, but I would like to propose an alternative arrangement. Holloway sighed. I've already been more than generous with extensions. I'm not asking for more time. I'm offering a partnership. This caught his attention. Partnership in what? My ranch. With the new horses I've acquired and the improvements made recently, it could be highly profitable within a year. I'm proposing you convert my debt into a share of the business rather than foreclosing. Holloway leaned back, considering. And who would manage this operation? You alone? For now, yes, but I'm in negotiations with an experienced rancher who may join the enterprise soon. It wasn't entirely a lie, more of a hope based on a feeling. After much discussion and review of her plans, Holloway surprisingly agreed to her proposal, though with strict conditions. The bank would hold a 40% interest in the ranch, and if it wasn't profitable within 18 months, they would still have the right to foreclose. It wasn't ideal, but it bought her time she desperately needed. 3 days later, as Gabriella was exercising one of the new horses in the corral, she spotted a familiar figure approaching on foot. Her heart stuttered as she recognized Colton, dressed in clean but simple clothes, his hat in his hands. She dismounted quickly and met him at the fence. "Mr. Carson, I heard the murder charges were dropped, but I didn't expect. Judge Thompson reduced my sentence to time served plus 5 years probation on the condition I make restitution and stay out of trouble." He offered a tentative smile. "The others got similar deals, though they're headed back east to serve their probation." "And you?" I requested to serve mine here. The marshal agreed, reluctantly. Gabriella studied him, hardly daring to hope. "Why here?" "Because I made a promise to help you save this ranch, and I intend to keep it." He hesitated, then added softly, "And because in the week I spent here, I felt more at home than I have in years." "Colton," Gabriella began, unsure what to say. "I understand if you want nothing to do with me," he continued quickly. "I lied to you, and that's unforgivable, but I'm asking for a chance to prove that the man you got to know that was the real me, the man I want to be again." Gabriella felt tears threatening. "I made a deal with the bank. They've converted my debt to a partnership interest in the ranch, but I need to make it profitable within 18 months. Then you need help," Colton said, hope entering his voice. "Someone who knows ranching. Someone who's willing to work harder than anyone to prove himself worthy of a second chance. And that's you, if you'll have me." He reached through the fence, offering his hand. "I can't change my past, Gabriella, but I can promise you my future, whatever that might be worth to you." Gabriella looked at his outstretched hand, then into his eyes. The man before her had lied about his name and his recent past, but in the depths of those blue eyes, she saw sincerity and something more, something that made her own heart respond in kind. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. "We start at dawn, don't be late." His smile was like the sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Yes, madam." The next months were a whirlwind of activity. True to his word, Colton worked from before sunrise to after sunset every day, throwing himself into the task of rebuilding the ranch with a dedication that left even Edwin impressed. Under Colton's guidance, they expanded the cattle herd, repaired irrigation systems to improve crop yields, and even built a new chicken coop that tripled egg production. Every improvement brought them one step closer to profitability and to each other. They fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side during the day and sharing meals and conversation in the evenings. Colton proved to be not just knowledgeable about ranching, but also surprisingly well-read, engaging Gabriella in discussions about books she'd thought no one else in the territory had even heard of. As summer turned to fall, Gabriella found herself watching Colton when he wasn't looking, admiring the strength in his hands as he worked with the horses, the kindness in his interactions with Edwin, the way the sun brought out gold highlights in his dark hair. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Colton turned to her with an uncharacteristically serious expression. "There's something I need to tell you," he said quietly, "something I should have shared months ago." Gabriella's heart sank. "More secrets?" "What is it?" "I lied about why I left being a sheriff." He took a deep breath. "It wasn't just because I shot that boy, though that was part of it. The truth is, I fell in love with a woman there, the mayor's daughter. She said she loved me too, wanted to marry me, but when her father found out, he offered me money to leave town and never contact her again." "Did you take it?" Gabriella asked softly. "No, I refused. Told him I'd marry her anyway if she'd have me." His eyes darkened with the memory. "But when I went to her, told her what her father had done," she laughed. "Said she'd never seriously considered marrying someone like me, a man with no real prospects, no family name worth mentioning. She'd just been amusing herself while waiting for a suitable match." "I'm sorry," Gabriella whispered, understanding now the pain she sometimes glimpsed in his eyes. "After that, I couldn't stay, left my badge on the mayor's desk and rode out that night, met up with Burke and Simmons a few months later when I was at my lowest." He looked at her directly. "That's why I've been so hesitant to speak what's in my heart, Gabriella. I've been afraid of being wrong again, of seeing something that isn't there." Gabriella's pulse quickened. And what is in your heart, Colton? For a moment he just looked at her, his eyes filled with a yearning that matched her own. Then slowly he reached for her hand. I love you, Gabriella Hayes. I think I started falling for you that first day at the well when you stood there with your rifle, not giving an inch. You're the strongest, most determined woman I've ever known, and these past months working beside you have been the happiest of my life. Joy bloomed in Gabriella's chest, but with it came fear born of her own past wounds. I can't be loved, Colton, she whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. What do you mean? She pulled her hand away, suddenly vulnerable. My mother left when I was 8, just packed her things one day and walked away. My father raised me alone, but he never recovered from her abandonment. He loved her until the day he died, despite everything. She blinked back tears. I swore I'd never put myself in that position, never depend on someone else's love only to have it withdrawn. Colton's expression softened with understanding. Then let me show you how, he said gently, echoing words she didn't realize she needed to hear. Let me show you that love doesn't have to be a risk or a weakness. It can be a strength, the greatest strength there is. How? She asked, her voice barely audible. By proving it day after day, not just in words but in actions. He moved closer, his hand coming up to brush a tear from her cheek. I'm not asking you to trust me blindly, Gabriella. I'm asking you to give me the chance to earn your trust, to build something with you that neither of us can build alone. In that moment, looking into his eyes, Gabriella felt the walls around her heart begin to crumble. She'd spent so long protecting herself from pain that she'd nearly missed the chance for joy. I'm afraid, she admitted. So am I, he confessed with a small smile, but I'd rather be afraid with you than certain with anyone else. As the last light of day faded from the sky, Gabriella made her choice. She leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in a kiss that felt like coming home, like finding a piece of herself she hadn't known was missing. Winter came early that year, bringing with it heavy snows that isolated the ranch for weeks at a time. But inside the small house, warmth and hope flourished. Colton moved from the bunkhouse into the main house at Gabriella's insistence, though he maintained propriety by sleeping in what had been her father's study. As Christmas approached, the ranch showed promising signs of recovery. The fall harvest had been better than expected, and their expanded herd had weathered the early storms well. When Mr. Holloway made his quarterly inspection, even he had to admit the improvements were substantial. You've done well, Miss Hayes, he acknowledged grudgingly. And you, Mr. Carson. The bank is cautiously optimistic about this arrangement. After he left, Colton swept Gabriella into a jubilant embrace. We're doing it. By this time next year, we'll have met all their conditions. We are, she agreed, smiling up at him. The months of working together had deepened their connection in ways she couldn't have imagined. Colton had proven himself not just as a ranch hand, but as a partner in every sense except one. That Christmas Eve, as they sat before the fire after a simple but satisfying dinner, Colton presented Gabriella with a small, crudely wrapped package. It's not much, he said almost shyly, but I wanted you to have something special. Inside was a delicate silver brooch in the shape of a wild rose. It was my mother's, he explained, the only thing of hers I've kept with me through everything. Gabriella touched it reverently. Colton, I can't accept this. It's your family heirloom. That's exactly why I want you to have it. He took her hands in his. Gabriella Hayes, these past months have shown me what it means to truly build a life with someone to share the work, the worries, and the triumphs. I love you more deeply than I ever thought possible, and if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my days showing you what love can be. Tears filled Gabriella's eyes as she realized he was proposing. Are you sure? My trust in the bank still isn't fully repaid. This ranch might never be what it once was. I'm not asking to marry the ranch, he said with a gentle smile. I'm asking to marry you. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. In that moment, the last of Gabriella's reservations melted away. Yes, she whispered, her heart full to bursting. Yes, I'll marry you, Colton Carson. Their wedding took place on a crisp March morning in 1877, with the snow-capped mountains providing a majestic backdrop. The ceremony was small but meaningful, attended by Edwin, Marshall Williams, who had grudgingly come to respect Colton's reformation, and a few townspeople who had gradually accepted Gabriella's unusual partnership with a reformed outlaw. As they exchanged vows beneath an arch of early spring blossoms, Gabriella reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, she had been alone and desperate, convinced that love was a luxury she could neither afford nor trust. Now, looking into Colton's eyes as he promised to cherish her all the days of his life, she understood that love wasn't something to fear, but to embrace not a weakness but her greatest strength. "I never thought I could be loved," she whispered to him as they shared their first dance as husband and wife, "but you showed me how. And I'll keep showing you," he promised, drawing her closer, "every day for the rest of our lives." By the following Christmas, the ranch was not only meeting its obligations to the bank, but exceeding all expectations. Under their joint management, what had once been a struggling homestead was now a thriving operation that employed 3 full-time hands in addition to Edwin, who stubbornly refused to retire despite Colton's gentle suggestions. As they prepared to welcome their first child in the spring, Gabriella often found herself standing on the porch at sunset, watching Colton work with the horses or check on the cattle, marveling at how completely her life had transformed. One evening, as the first snow of winter began to fall, Colton joined her, wrapping his arms around her expanding waistline. "What are you thinking about, Mrs. Carson?" he murmured against her hair. "About how wrong I was," she replied, leaning back against his chest. "When I said I couldn't be loved, you weren't wrong," he said thoughtfully. "You just hadn't met someone stubborn enough to prove otherwise." Gabriella laughed, turning in his arms to face him. "Is that what you did, out-stubborn me? Maybe a little." His smile was tender as he placed a hand on her belly, where their child grew. "But mostly, I just loved you as imperfectly and completely as I knew how." As the snow fell gently around them, blanketing the land they had saved together in pristine white, Gabriella stood on tiptoe to kiss the man who had shown her that love wasn't something to fear, but to cherish a lesson she would soon pass on to their child and perhaps someday to their children's children. For on this land that had once seemed doomed to be lost, they had built not just a successful ranch but a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone, proof that even the most guarded heart could learn to love and be loved in return. 5 years later, the Carson Ranch had become one of the most respected in the territory. Their herd had tripled in size, and their crops consistently yielded bountiful harvests. The bank's partnership had been dissolved after just 3 years when Gabriella and Colton were able to buy out Mr. Holloway's interest entirely. Their family had grown as well. Their daughter, Catherine, now 4 years old, had her mother's determination and her father's gentle way with animals. And their son, James, had just celebrated his 2nd birthday, already showing signs of the same stubborn independence that had once kept his parents apart. On a warm summer evening, as the children played in the yard under Edwin's watchful eye, the old man, having finally accepted a permanent position as grandfather to the Carson children rather than ranch hand, Colton and Gabriella took a rare moment alone to ride to the ridge overlooking their property. "Remember when you first came here?" Gabriella asked, gesturing to the spot where they'd stopped their horses. "You called it a fine water we had, though you were clearly just being polite about my failing ranch." Colton laughed. "I was trying to make a good impression. Though I'll admit I saw more potential in the rancher than in the ranch at first." "Is that so?" She raised an eyebrow playfully. "And here I thought you were just looking for a place to hide." "I was looking for something, that's certain." His expression grew serious. "I just didn't know it was you until I found you." The years had only deepened their connection, transforming what began as tentative trust into an unshakable bond. They had weathered droughts and blizzards, market fluctuations, and the occasional reminder of Colton's past when travelers from the east brought news of his former associates. Through it all, They had remained steadfast in their commitment to each other, and to the life they were building, a life that had expanded to include not just their immediate family, but also a growing community of fellow ranchers and farmers who looked to the Carsons as leaders in the region. Marshall Williams mentioned yesterday that the governor is considering you for the Territorial Agricultural Commission, Gabriella said as they gazed out over their land, where cattle grazed peacefully in the distance. I heard. Colton shook his head in wonder. From wanted outlaw to government appointee in 6 years, not sure what to make of that. I do. Gabriella reached across the space between their horses to take his hand. It means people can change when given the chance and the right motivation. His fingers tightened around hers. You were my motivation, Gabriella. You and this land. You made me want to be the man I always should have been. We made each other better, she corrected gently. You showed me how to trust again, how to let myself be loved. That gift was every bit as valuable as anything I gave you. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, they turned their horses toward home, toward the small but growing house where their children waited, where the legacy they had built together continued to flourish. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Marshall Williams hadn't received that telegram? Gabriella asked as they rode side by side down the gentle slope. If your past hadn't caught up with you that day, Colton considered the question seriously. I'd like to think we would have found our way to each other regardless, that somehow I would have found the courage to tell you the truth on my own. I believe you would have, she said with conviction, because beneath everything else, you've always been a man of honor, Colton Carson. Even when you were trying not to be. His laugh was warm in the cooling evening air. You always did see the best in me, even when I didn't deserve it. No, she corrected, I saw you clearly, past and present, flaws and strengths. And I chose to love all of you, just as you chose to love all of me. As they approached the ranch, they could see Edwin lifting Catherine onto his shoulders while James toddled after them, determined to keep up. The sight filled Gabriella's heart with a joy so complete it almost hurt. I still can't believe this is our life, she said softly. Sometimes I wake up afraid it's been a dream, that I'll find myself back in that desperate place, alone and about to lose everything. Colton reined his horse to a stop, prompting Gabriella to do the same. In the fading light, his eyes were earnest as they met hers. It's real, Gabriella. Every day, every moment it's ours, and I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt it. He leaned across the space between them, his hand coming up to cradle her cheek as he kissed her with a tenderness that still had the power to make her breath catch, even after all this time. When they finally reached the yard, Catherine broke away from Edwin and ran to meet them, her dark braids flying behind her. Papa, Mama, look what I found. In her small hands was a wild rose, similar to the one depicted in the brooch Gabriella still wore on special occasions. It's beautiful, sweetheart, Colton said, swinging down from his horse and lifting his daughter into his arms. Just like your mama. Gabriella dismounted and joined them, James immediately demanding to be picked up as well. As she settled her son on her hip, she caught Colton's gaze over their children's heads, a look that still held the promise he'd made to her years ago on her porch, when she'd admitted her deepest fear. I can't be loved, she had said then, believing it with all her heart. Then let me show you how, he had answered, and he had day after day, year after year, through actions that spoke louder than words could ever do. He had shown her that love wasn't just something to be received, but something to be given freely, without expectation or condition. That true love didn't diminish the person you were, but enhanced it, bringing out strengths you never knew you possessed. As they walked together toward the house, their children chattering excitedly about their day's adventures, Gabriella felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought them here, for every hardship and joy, every doubt and certainty that had shaped their path. The girl who couldn't be loved and the cowboy who showed her how had built something remarkable together. Not just a successful ranch or a growing family, but a love story that would be told for generations to come, a testament to the power of second chances and the courage it takes to open one's heart, even when it seems impossible. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky above their home, Gabriella knew with absolute certainty that this life, this love, this family was the greatest adventure of all.